Hey everybody, welcome to Oregon State University Permaculture Design Pro. This is the spring and summer of 2023, and this is our fifth office hours. And we've got some questions that have been popped up, as well as we've got some questions from a couple of folks who are here live. So I'm just going to pop over to some of these questions and we'll kind of pop back and forth because the student has asked a lot of questions and we want to kind of go back and forth. So I'll start with her first one and then we'll go to you, Matt, and Francis, if you have any questions, as I'm insanely jealous about your walking desk. I'm so jealous. It's great. Cool. Let's jump into this here. So do the old share screen. So Carol's first question is, as you know, behind on assignments, haven't been able to do our third or fourth office hours, trying to find them. Yeah, nobody showed up for office hours 3 and 4, so there is no recording. And so, yeah, I'm going to wait. She was going to pop on and we were going to chat a little bit about this. So maybe we'll pop to you now, Matt, with your question.
Yeah, sure. Do you want me to post them in the doc or?
Oh, no, you could just say them. That's fine.
All right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So first thing was I wanted to check in. I just submitted my week 4 stuff yesterday, so a little late, fell behind life, But I wanted to check that I did the zoning assignment properly. I wasn't super sure if I was kind of shortcutting it because it's undeveloped land and there's no real current established zones or patterns of usage. Do you want me to put the link of for my project in?
Yeah, if you could put the link up there, that'd be great. I can pop it up and we can take a look at it.
In the chat here, does that work?
Yeah, chat's fine.
Okay.
So I think I'm gonna interpret your question because I think because you're not currently on the land, it's probably just like one zone or two, and feels like you cheated the assignment, but you totally did.
I feel like I cheated. Yes.
No, you got it, man. Yeah. So this is it. You generally zone 4 monthly to yearly and zone 5. So yeah, for some of the zone conversation, it's exactly what it should be, which is we're not there a bunch. So this is what it looks like. When you take a look at zones kind of sequentially, or even from like a seasonal conversation in terms of like summer and winter, if you get a sense of where generally you're going to be, and this is why I think this is a great example, you get a sense of generally where you're going to be, you're going to actively keep the zones and the elements that have a lot of frequency close to the house. So that way you're not going all over the back 40. One of the things that I see more often than not when I'm doing design work on previously designed properties is everything's so spread out. It's so far away. It's insane the amount of space and time people spend to try and get to a spot or get to a place. I had this very same argument with my husband because we wanted to put together a cob oven to do pizzas and all the rest of this. And we had this old fuel shed that was supposed to house these two fuel containers back when it was a working farm instead of just, a homestead. And he wanted to put it all the way out there, but it's close to 150 feet away from the house. And those types of elements so far away from the house become problematic. You just don't use them. You don't go out to them. You don't interact with them. So being conscientious of where the things are and keeping them close is why zonation within permaculture is so useful as a tool. So no, I don't think you cheated at all. This is great.
Okay. Yeah, just good to know. And you can see the footpath, there. I'm only there, maybe once a month at this point. I'm just hiking or camping or messing around on property. So in terms of just looking forward, those that you can kind of see this clustering of where I tend to go, and that's a function of just like topography of land and path, little forest pathways that already exist, right?
Yeah.
I feel like it kind of informs where a lot of the primary kind of zone 1 stuff should end up going just naturally. What do you think?
100%. Yeah, 100%. So there may be elements that as you start to go through microclimate, you may find just because of the sizing of this, obviously this is mostly east facing, but
Mhm.
there may be it basically reads to me here that, this is kind of your flattest spot. This is second flattest and this is third, and then you're into forest. So, chances are if you're all the way over here all the time, fine, no problems. But it may be that in terms of cost or the build, because I think we talked about a bermed house potentially for you. It may be that you end up down here just because of that flat land, because there's some value to it. But yeah, you're totally right. As you're here and walking around, you get a better sense of the spot than if you had just never stepped onto the land.
Yeah, and I think that lower flat spot you're referring to, it's quite a wet area, kind of wet meadow,
Gotcha.
almost wetlandy.
Mm-hmm.
So I've never really thought I'd end up doing much building there, at least initially. And then it's also quite just close down to, roadside.
Neighbors. Yeah.
Part just wants to get a little further in. So that I've been looking at that, 1,500 foot to, would that be 1,520, I guess,
Yeah. This little
ridge
band.
area there as a good spot. But yeah, it'll add to the driveway length and so forth and cost and so, I guess, in some ways. But
yeah, and that's the question when you're building. This is the due diligence. There's a question that we have this week about, should I bring in power, or should I bring in or should I do solar? And it's always a due diligence question. What are you getting for the dollar per cost, and then what's the value of the two? So if you hold a value as your site, as I think these other people do, that they like the independence, they like that conversation, then going solar might be the way to go. But I think their conversation, which we'll get into in a sec, is like $22,000 to bring power in. Whereas if you're talking solar, depending on your kilowatt grid, you're probably somewhere from 50 to 80 by the time you're done. So what's the difference between the two of those versus bringing power in, getting panels, doing grid tie, and then slowly moving back to batteries, as opposed to having like some peace of mind. So, similarly in your situation, when you're thinking about site and design in terms of where do you want your zone of access to be, walking that site, camping on that site, it's one of the things that I've recommended to clients and students for years. If you've just bought the site, don't do anything for a year, just go camp on it. Camp in a couple different places, see what the views are like, see what the temperature is like, because there's going to be a thermocline here, ideally probably right here actually, where you're going to get the most moderate temperatures between the up and between the top of the hill and the bottom. But right on that forest edge would be a beautiful spot.
And this kind of goes to my next question, as it relates to this week's assignments. How much should I basically come up with a water plan or anything else before establishing like zones and build locations for structures, driveway, all of that? Like, how important would it be to kind of prioritize the water management, earthworks, catchment systems first before anything else?
So generally, depending on the process, in permaculture, it's water access structure. So first you take care of the water, and then you look at access, and then you look at structure. And that was built off of P.A. Yeoman's scale of permanence for all things agricultural, which took a look at what were the things that were the least changeable and took the most amount of effort, and what was the most changeable and took the least amount of effort. And the way he looked at that, which is informed Bill Mollison and David Holmgren, is the climate, the overall weather patterns influence the topography, and then that topography influences the water flow. So you've got this order of operation. You have that climate, you have that topography, and then you have that water flow. And because of that, if you decide house goes here before you take a look at water and topography, you may find issue because that water is flowing in an area or creating a drainage or or what have you. And even after water is access, we're still at access before we're getting into forestry, and then we're getting into structures. So there's a fair amount of division before we get to buildings, at least in my experience. And I'm working with a client right now who wanted me to give them advice on where the house went before I did any of the design work. And I just said, no, I have to take a look at all those different places. I have to take a look at my GIS outputs. I have to take a look at where water accumulation is. One of my favorite tools is a water accumulation GIS overlay that then shows where the water goes on a site, to the point to where I did the survey for, and then did the GIS overlay for a client of mine. And the water pathway that came down this roadside was within 10 inches of where it was actually on that roadside. It was so accurate. So that for me always informs, where does that water flow? Where does that conversation happen? And then let's make sure that we're putting that to productive use. And so one of those things, because your site, as far as my read of it is, and I could be wrong, but like looking at the contours here, I'm just gonna pull them up, looking at the contours here, understanding that water flows to right angle to contour. The majority of this, as you were saying, this is going to get a little wet because this is it's a humid zone, right? Hampton, New York. You have quite a bit of forest, which is holding a lot of that water. And then generally when you get to devegetated area, you're going to have that water come up in some way, shape, or form and be held. So I would be very conscientious of where you're seeing those wet areas, where you're seeing that water flow, and being conscientious about that before you say, well, the house goes here. I think in my mind, it's, well, if this is the dry spot and I like this view, here's desirable spot 1 for the house, and here's desirable spot 2. But the bigger question is, what do you want to do on this land? Do you want to have animals? Do you want to have different types of trees or kind of production structures, be they orchards or food forests or shelter belts? All of those things for me come first, because after that, you can place the house anywhere. However, if you put the house in a place where, that's a great spot for the trees to be, or that's a great spot for the windbreak, then it becomes an order of operation issue, and you're basically force functioning. House goes here, we'll deal with the issues afterwards. Years ago, when I started working in this field, I started in natural building and alternative building, and it was there was a couple of books I read that were just phenomenal. One was Little House on a Tiny Planet, and then the other one was Ianto Evans' Cobb Cottage Company's, all of his books. And what was so fascinating that I took away from that is the moment we build a house, we hook it up to life support. It's dead by the moment it's built. It's like, here's the life support, stay alive as long as you can. The majority of our houses are not biophilic in nature. They do not interact with and work with what's around them to keep them cool, warm, electricity, light penetration. Ianto's big conversation was, have light in your cave. Wherever your cave is, have natural light coming into it, so you don't have to spend the money on it. And I always loved that conversation. It was always an important one. So, those are the types of things that I would worry about first, and then let those dictate potentially where the house might be.
So my intuition was correct. I mean, that makes total sense. Lots of work to do before getting to that point.
Yeah, lots of work. Yeah, there's, it's easy to rush decisions. Being down here in Ecuador, the Ecuadorian ecology and the economy are very different. It's very cheap to build, so people want to get their money out of their build, and so they'll double the price of the house to get their money out. Yet it's like $45 a square foot for steel construction, as opposed to 44 or 40 for cinder block. And the majority of people, when they come down here, if they're expats or they're retired, they want to buy a house immediately. It's like, take your time, take a year, take 2, take a look. It's being, long, thoughtful, protracted thought is this big thing we get in permaculture. And then there's this great Japanese adage that I always think of, which is thought before action is a nightmare. Thought without action is a daydream, and action without thought is a nightmare. So I'd rather you spend another month or 2, think about it, and go like, no, I'm 100% on this. And this is something else. Actually, the instructors started talking about it. We just had a little meeting, and they're like, oh, why do the students always give us the same answer in the SWOTs? Because it's another lens with which to look through the property, and you're supposedly coming up with the same answer over and over. And if there is a novel outlier, then great, let's consider why that is, as opposed to having different answers every single time. It's like, it should be repetitious. You should be coming and honing down on the design every time you go through another assignment, or the design process that this course lays out. So yeah, I think you're on the right track, man.
May I ask one or two more?
Yeah, go nuts. We're open office hours now.
You mentioned cinder block there, and that got me thinking. I've kind of been debating. And do you have any recommendations on that front in terms of foundation, especially if it's going to be like a quasi berm house, or at the very least a walkout basement? One side of the structure is embedded, or at least like a primary residence. I'm assuming here.
Yeah,
I'm imagining. Concrete cinder block in this type of fairly wet, water, New York Catskill watershed, environment. Any expertise on foundation material?
I think you're probably going to be interested in ICF, which is insulated concrete foundation, which are blocks. They come in blocks, and they're basically stacked like Lego. And then they have insulation to them, but they also have structural value. And you're probably going to be going with a waterproof or watertight spray-on foundation. So it'll probably be an excavation. It'll be a spray-on. The main question will be, and if you've got a good architect that you're working with, or a geotech, will be really understanding the water flow there. So you're not having to put a sump pump in. So you're pumping out the water 24/7, 365. So that'll be the big conversation, I imagine, for you guys, is just being conscientious about the area and the high water table, as well as the sublaminar flow, because you've got a lot of water that's coming through there. But I imagine it'll probably be ICF with probably a spray-on membrane of some shape or form. I would imagine would be a good option to look at. Yeah.
And aren't ICFs pretty expensive?
No, they're about 5 to 10% more than concrete foundation.
Okay.
Not bad. It's not bad. And for the insulative value, they're definitely worth it. A basement that's kept cold. And this is the other thing. I'm working with this other client right now on integrative design, in terms of they're working with their architect and all the rest of it. It's like, be conscientious about if there's a way to build in a cold room or a root cellar, or if there's a way to have the outdoor kitchen. Because if you are looking at homesteading, if you are looking at gardening as being a larger portion of what that land does, having those walkthroughs and workthroughs makes good sense. They're potentially thinking about selling produce. So we're talking about a full pack house that's kind of on extension, same sort of idea. It's a bermed house. But then you also have a walk-in cooler, and from there you have a walk-in root cellar. So basically that workflow is very easy. It's bring the produce in, you weigh, you wash, you pack, or you process. Because once you get into processing food and canning and all the rest of it, it's like wood. The less you move it, the happier you are. If you have to like crate everything in and make a big mess in your domestic kitchen as opposed to an outside kitchen, it changes the conversation. So you're starting off, and these things don't have to be elaborate. They can be very simple. You can work with a couple of boards and make your outdoor kitchen with a couple of simple propane burners. But at the same time, there's so much excess restaurant gear, from either the prep tables to the full sinks and the full nozzles and hoses and everything. We ended up finding one for, I think, a couple $100, and that became our outdoor kitchen, and it was better than our indoor kitchen.
Nice.
So yeah, I would be conscientious about that. And that's where, if you are planning the gardens, now it makes really good sense of like, oh, okay, this is the annual garden, this is the zone 1 garden, this is the quick cut come again. How does that then flow into the kitchen? And all of those things, when you have that intelligent design, it increases your quality of life exponentially. You just love living in your home more.
For sure. Well, thank you. The only other thing I was going to ask is as it kind of relates to plant identification.
Okay.
And what a nightmare it is for those of us that well, I'll speak for myself, not a botanist or you know, have studied this
I
for
use
years.
AI for that. Are those apps
It's
that you
tricky, right? It's really tricky. Did you feel the same way, Francis?
I mean, I don't know if this is cheating, but I get those a lot of those apps called like Plant ID, and they give you a bunch of suggestions, and you kind of just like compare the leaves and then go with your gut. But you know, I'm not like a botanist, right? So
Yeah.
I have any ideas.
They're help the apps are helpful tools. Like if you didn't know anything, Javin, what would you recommend?
So I didn't know
Yeah.
anything. I was the most I knew about plants when I started this world 14 years ago was from what I learned in Boy Scouts, which was which one's burnt quickest and best and with most, you know, joy to a 12-year-old. So I knew nothing. I had zero botany background. And this was after working for the park system for a while, where I had to basically beat identification into me. What I wish I had known, and I'm pretty sure, hold on, I just want to make sure that that's there because I feel like this question came up. I recorded an answer and I think I put it into the tutorial for local ecology. I just want to make sure I did this. Of course, the bandwidth is being taken up dramatically.
I've found quite a few resources like old office hours that you've done and you know other app or book recommendations, which has been super helpful.
Yeah.
But I think it's you know, I feel like I just have to put a bunch of time into learning and being more familiar and
yeah, totally. Yeah. So
and
there's
repetition and memorizing. So,
Is it possible you can get like a local guide with this? Because like I don't have personal experience with this, but from what I've read always is that, especially about identifying mushrooms and mycology, is like reading from books is very different than somebody showing you what it is and eating it in front of you. Somehow you learn this so much faster, and then that's been consistent with everybody that I read through, that I talked to so far, and I'm just like, so if you can find somebody who's like good at this, taking a hike could just maybe what you need with them.
So I just wanted to check in on slide 54. There's a how to ID plants tutorial. And in that, I'm basically going to go through the same conversation, which is if I had to start again, I would get Thomas Elpel's Botany in a Day book, which is on our resource list on the office hours. And I would start there. The reason being is that he developed, and I think we should all do this actually. He developed Botany in a Day because it was his way of going through plants. It was his, yeah, there you go. Nice. You got it. It was his way of going like, okay, mint, square stem, opposite leaves, alternating opposite leaves. Cool. And then after that, it's finding something that delights you about the flora, about the plant world. Finding something that delights you. For me, it was plants that I was using in a medicinal nature. So it was Spilanthes, which was this cool plant that felt like there was a 9-volt battery on your tongue. And that was my gateway that got me into really getting deep into a plant and being excited about it. And what I found is dating one plant for a year, like understanding its growth cycle, its germination, its date to maturity, its yield, that helped me to take out of scope oh my God, there are so many plants to learn. There's so much to do. And come down to, I'm just dating a plant this year. I'm just understanding this one plant, understanding what it's about, what it isn't. And it was always a plant I loved. I never tried to go and learn something. Pardon me. I started trying to learn plants just to learn them. And it was a failure, absolute abysmal failure, because I had a mentor who's a savant with it. You can tell him any plant name, be it Latin or common, he'll tell you the opposite. And then he'll tell you everything about that plant. It's just his deal. He's the plant guy. And 14 years later, I would say that, oh, well, hopefully I'm a bit of a plant guy at this point, but he's still just outpaced me in just strides that make me feel embarrassed. But what I realized is that over this time, I keep coming back to Einstein's quote, never memorize what you can't look up. And so local guides like Francis was talking about, and learning how to use a dichotomous key, which is a way of going, is it this or is it this? And then it puts it into two categories, and is it this or is it this? And puts it into another category. And using those over and over and over again, you do get a fair amount of deftness with it. And then what Thomas did, because that's his book of understanding plants. And if you take a look, you'll see beside the titles of the different plants, there's like an asterisk. I don't remember if it's an asterisk or a dot or something. I took a couple of courses with him, like, Thomas, something about your book has totally flabbergasted me for years. What's going on with this book? Like, why are there asterisks? He's like, oh, that's if I found it. That's if I've recorded it. And that's if I have a press of it, because there's this whole conversation of pressing the leaves and pressing the flowers, and then that becoming your larger conversation. If you're not motivated to learn that level of conversation, then you just may not be the guy that knows everything about plants, and that's okay. Just start with a few. Don't get excited if you don't know them. Like Francis said, the apps are pretty good. I've really relied on the groups. Like the Reddit groups are great. Like, what's this plant? What's this bug? What's this mushroom? Because you've got like 25 people fighting to be right and tell you the right answer. And then they're all trying to like fight each other. So that way that guy doesn't know what he's talking about. So I found that has been probably the most accurate way that I've found plants that the other ways haven't worked out. But it's just time in, man. Like, we all have an ignorance debt and a time debt when we're learning anything. And you just have to pay that down with dedicated, work on it. But start with what you love.
It just reminded me, because one of the best advice I got from working on Reddit and getting answers from Reddit is that you log into another account of yours, you answer the wrong answer very confidently, and then you get
the right answer. Exactly. Yeah.
It's self-correcting. Yeah.
Yeah. Reddit is like the ultimate Gestapo. Like they just self-police in such a intense way. Probably because the majority of Redditors are 18 to 45-year-old men who are like, I want to be right. That's my purpose in life.
But like, it's like not really about age, because if they spend all their time obsessed about one tiny thing, they're probably a lot more knowledgeable about that than me.
100%. 100%. Yeah. Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Does that help, Matt?
For sure. Yeah, definitely. It's good tips, and I'll just keep pumping away. But I'll check the Reddit stuff. I think is a good resource too.
Yeah, if you're looking for specific ID, for sure. The other thing is, reach out, see if there's any naturalists or people within the permaculture space or the naturalist space that are offering tours and walking tours. Sometimes going on a tour and getting a story about a plant just changes your conversation completely, because the backstory, the elements. I did a number of Indigenous walks when I was back in Canada, both in British Columbia and Alberta. And I just had a deeper appreciation for the plant. There was a whole context and history. It wasn't just this simple thin slice of taxonomy. It's just like, this is the Latin, this is when, it's just boring data. It's like anything when you're talking about memorization, once you get to the why of it, you can learn anything. But if it's still just like a data point to memorize, then that's where the story piece comes in. Like, I'll always remember that Yarrow's Latin name, Achilles, because the story of Achilles and the story of Yarrow helping with strains and sprains, and like that story just makes it so much easier for me to remember the Latin name, as opposed to the only Latin name that I tried to memorize, which took me a summer, which was Verbascum thapsus, which is mullein, which is the big, tall, flowery, fuzzy leafed nature's toilet paper, it's also called. Great for respiratory, but it took me 3 months of like, what's that? Thapsus, Verbascum, right? And so now I have this random piece of information that's in my head forever. But the story piece I found really useful as well, because we're hardwired and hard coded to understand and work with story.
Yeah, I'll look into that.
Yeah,
local walks like that would be great.
Yeah, for sure. Any other questions, Ben?
I think that's it for me at this point. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, no worries. Francis, you got any questions or queries?
Sure. I just want to kind of follow up on, because you did respond to me on the discussion groups, the PDC, advanced PDC for climate resilience.
Mm-hmm.
So I did take a look. That course doesn't start until February, and then that's assuming if I graduate and get my certification on PDC Pro this year. So I don't know if there's any other resources. The context there is kind of interesting, because I started thinking about what my design site means. And obviously, it's supposed to also be a business.
Mhm.
But the role it occupies, the one I pitched to my team members in the MBA capstone was that I wanted this to be a demonstration site to show that there's an economically viable way of using ecological design. So build human habitation without ruining the environment in a way, but
Mhm.
also do it in a way that's ecological. Economical. So that's why I kind of take the tourism aspect and merge with it, and then that sparked the conversation around like, hey, what scale level project can you actually do this, in a more scaled fashion to actually move the needle in terms of the climate conversation.
Mhm.
So that's why like, I started looking for those resources because one of the team members, she's a PhD doing geospatial data research in Alaska. So one, she wanted to do the similar thing like a resort by Yukon, but also she's interested in this whole climate resilience conversation, and it got me thinking, hey, there's a part of it where we established some sort of non-for-profit where I raise some funding because I'm the business person to then do this survey, let's say Canada or US, and then find strategic location where like if this area was more robust, it actually affects the whole downstream, the whole down the mountainside of that area to be more resilient towards changing conditions, and we strategically acquire those land and restore them, or they're not devastated yet, but build them in a way that are resilient. So I was like kind of trying to get a primer for this. What type of scale are we talking about? Are these like village scale projects or like something smaller? So really trying to do like a feasibility check on that side because like I'm obviously seeing the way to usually know business practices to push for something good. I think like the last 2 weeks, some of my students, I teach entrepreneurship, they're doing really great things. One of them invented a zero energy, like so solar powered, but like you don't need to have reliable energy source equipment. There's a handle that pasteurizes milk, and she's working with East Africans
Mm.
because that's like a lot of that. And they're doing great things, and I was like, you know what? I'm teaching, right? I'm under pressure to do more good things myself too. So I started thinking about this line as well. So that's kind of why you asked. And
Yeah,
last month chaotic for me, sorry, I'm behind on the course.
gotcha.
Yeah.
So what I can do is I can explain the process of that course. And I still think this is probably the best way of taking a look at climate resiliency and the process and how it's done.
Yeah.
And hopefully that's of some value. And this is the same thing I do for clients now. If they want that within the design brief, is being conscientious about it's called the A1F1 IPCC climate predictions. And basically A1F1 is nobody changes. There's no monumental or substantive change in terms of our consumption habits, our degradation to ecology habits. There's no change. And so basically it's worst case scenario, which generally has been on track or worse than. So the A1F1 predictions are good to use. There's two resources I've thrown in the Q&A doc, which you can take a look at there for you. And I'll just pop them up here. One is the abstract about the climate classifications and the predictions that were done. And then the other one is actually the data set. So both of these are in the Q&A. And so this is done up in a KMZ file. This is the Global Shift A1F1 KMZ file, 1976 to 2100. And basically what you can do is you can change the scope and the scale, as this little GIF shows, of the change from a site from one point to another. And I can pull this up on Google Earth Pro because I've got this up right now. And we'll pull up.
Sorry, John, where do you link that? That's okay. You just link the Q&A doc. I'll just bookmark it this time because I couldn't find it actually.
Yeah, so if you go to our homepage within the Canvas, it's the very first link. It says office hours, and then in office hours, there's the Q&A deck. Yeah,
because I searched the initial email that was blasted out, and throughout all the the blue text they have on the template, I clicked from also the links. I couldn't find it. Like, okay.
Well, it's not on the template because it's ours, right? And our specific Q&A is specific to our class, whereas the template runs every single class that's there. So every single time we have a new class.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, so I just threw it in the I just threw it in the Zoom chat there. So I'm going to pop this up just to show you guys how it works. And we use Carol's site. Looks like she was having problems getting on, which is too bad, but I'll do a little review of her site. I think it'll be useful for everybody. So basically, this is one of the Copenhagen classification pieces. And so it's going to take a moment to load. A little bit too close in. There we go. Cool. So basically, this is her here, and this runs from. Oh, pardon me. This one. There we go. Cool. So this goes to 2099. So we're in 2023. So let's say 25 years we want to figure out. So that's 48. So we'll take it to 48. We'll pop it back to 23. And in this, we can get a sense of if we're actually changing our climate classification here. Is it actually moving forward or is it moving back? I'm just going to turn off a few other things. Similarly, we can run this up another 50 years. So let's call it 50. So 73. We can run it up to 73. Pull it back to 23. And again, we're seeing that her site is moving quite dramatically. And then we'll do 75 years. So adding another 25. So we're 90, 98, right at the edge of this. And then we've changed quite dramatically. So this then gives you the sense of, I'm just gonna make sure that's the case. Yeah. This gives us a sense of where this is moving and in what shape is it moving. Now, the next piece is understanding what your Copenhagen classification is currently, what that new climate classification is, and then understanding basically the deviation between. So generally within 25 to 50 years in North America, kind of without exception, we're going to get more humid and more hot. The reason for this is we're going to get more moisture over the next little while in different times of year, usually increasing what our average is, but getting it more concentrated. This has to do with there being more energy in the atmosphere, not just from carbon. It's kind of a misnomer to say carbon's the bad doer. It's kind of a monocrop of metrics. We have water in the atmosphere as well, which takes up 75% of the thermodynamics of the planet. So the amount of water we've released because of devegetation and because of draining of areas is as, if not, in my opinion, more problematic when we come to climate variation and climate change. So once you have that sense of those deviation changes, then you can take a look at, okay, so we're going to go more moist in the next 25, and then we're going to drop precipitously to below the levels that we're currently at and go much warmer. Okay, so how then do we transition into that? What's the conversation there? So generally what it means is that we need to size most of our water, our earthworks, our waterways, things of that nature to accept anywhere from a 25 to a 75% increase in total average. And usually in an event, 100 to 200, sometimes 300% more. This means that the way we size our gutters, all the way to the way we size our drainage dishes, has to be comprehensive within that conversation. Is there going to be a payback on that? Probably not. It's probably just your fields and your site is not inundated with water for a season, but that season of potential growth or productivity is not going to outweigh the extra earthwork costs that you're going to have to do up front to make things larger and make things more robust. However, as you come off of that 25 to that 50-year crest, you're going to get much drier and you're going to start to become much warmer. So that means partially having an eye on dryland farming, which is a process of plant breeding, so that way plants take less water over the long run. Second is being conscientious about what are the boundary species on the other sides of your Copenhagen classification. And Copenhagen specifically came from native vegetation, so it's thought of to be one of the most accurate ways of taking a look at climate. So if you're on the boundary of either your hardiness zone or the amount of moisture you need, because of course solar is not going to change, and if it does, nothing matters. If our solar axis changes, nothing else matters. People get upset about things like that. It's like, that's one of those things you don't have to worry about. You won't be here to worry about it. But having a sense of those two conditions, and then having anywhere from, always planting in 3, 5s, or 7s. So always planting this odd number so that we have a resilient species, like one specimen is not enough. But if you want to have a few just to see what they're doing and how they're thriving, that's usually what I'm suggesting for clients these days is definitely work inside of your zone solidly, especially in terms of if it's trending towards warmer. Definitely be
Right.
inside of your zone solidly. Don't try and push like 5 zones out. Everybody has this wonderful affliction in permaculture called autozoninitis, where everyone thinks they should grow peaches where you can only grow apples. It takes up so much work and energy. It's not worth it. So having some speciations like that, sizing your materials appropriately, really focusing on water holding capacity in your soil. So increasing water holding capacity, WHC, which generally means increasing organic matter. So 1% of organic matter on an acre is 20,000 liters of water at a minimum. And you're never going to be able to cost out rainwater harvesting that way, or ponds. Rainwater harvesting in Canada is $1.50 a liter installed, whereas ponds are anywhere from 50 to 75 cents if you've got a good driver, good excavator operator. So with those things said, make sure that your speciations make sense. Make sure you're not pushing the zonation in terms of anything productive, but have sample species that will show you generally if they're producing well or not. For the next little while, be conscientious that most plants are not going to get the consistent moisture that they usually need, but they are going to get, in terms of the annual, more than they need at any one time, which means increasing your organic matter of your soil will be important, because the main thing is, again, going back to that permaculture principle of catch and store energy, we want to be able to catch that water. And then in terms of anything to do with heating or cooling, be as interested and focused on passive, anything that uses the ambient temperature of the soil, either be it climate batteries when it comes to greenhouses, where you've got an insulated volume of soil beneath the greenhouse, where during the summer you have fans that are pushing that warm air down into the ground, heating up that ground, and then it has a delayed effect of anywhere from 2 to 3 to 6 months to then give that heat back. Those types of technologies make really good sense. Any sort of breeding capacity or genetic capacity where you're actively breeding out your stock and you're actively saving that seed will be insanely important. The whole Svalbard seed bank is a great idea. It's totally great idea, should happen. I have nothing to say about that. However, those seeds that are put into that vault, they're starting to change this, but not very quickly. Those seeds that were put in the vault 10, 15 years ago, they have no history of the change of what's happening on the planet. And so when they are put into production, they're going to have to be babied. They're not going to have that epigenetics that'll help them change and grow throughout the conversation. So those would be what I would do. And that's basically what the course does. It basically gives you a prompt to say, what's your current Kopengeiger? What's your projected Kopengeiger? What are 4 or 5 different similar Kopengeiger locations than yours? What do they do differently than your site? And then in the projected, what are tools, skills, vegetation? I think there's 25 categories that you're supposed to take a look at, and then apply that research in small nucleated ways. That's generally what I'm doing.
I mean, lots of thoughts. I think 3 or 4 thoughts on my side. So one is like, when you say about everybody wants to grow peaches, I'm also that. I want to grow a peach orchard, and then I think I'm one zone off. If I'm 2 hours south, near the lake, no problem. And now I think it's too cold where my site is, but I can relate to that pain. And the second is, I think 2 weeks and a half ago, I read this Gates' book, How to Stop a Climate Disaster. Helped me a lot in terms of kind of understanding literally what you just said. Because I think 3 weeks ago, I would understand less, kind of a difference. And naturally, one thing as I thought is, should we then consider like climate shifts as like a sector then, in terms of effect on the site then?
100%. Yeah. 100%.
Kind of like could be that. And then it got me to the fourth thing, right? Does that, okay, so in North America, we're going to generally get more hot and more humid. Does that mean the land value is about to go up north?
It is.
Time to stockpile cheap land now?
It is. It is. Yeah. I've had that conversation with a number of clients that we're going to see an opening of that area. But the other issue is that the muskeg, which is the majority of the northern portion of Canada, which if you take a look back into World War II of them building the Alaska Highway, which is the single greatest example of why muskeg is a problem, a lot of that land is muskeg. And so being conscientious for anybody who decides to look at that in terms of a value opportunity, be very conscientious that you're not on muskeg, because that'll be a problem.
What do you mean? What is that? I don't know what the term means.
So muskeg is like a boreal tundra bog that is built upon years of organic matter that's built up, decomposed, built up, decomposed, built up, decomposed. That really isn't parent material. You cannot get a solid structure onto it. It's very hard to farm because it's basically like growing in peat, which you would think, oh, growing in peat's great, except for the fact that as you're going out of your temperate into your polar, into your temperate, into your polar, you don't get that same buildup of nutrition that you would need or want. And generally, it's super moist, it's like sponge moist. And so you have an issue in terms of transportation, locomotion, movement, and rot. Things rot and sort of can become preserved in that type of acidic environment. So in terms of agriculture, it's got a long way to go, which is one of the reasons why so many people are doing container gardening or greenhouse gardening with domes up there due to the solar aspect. But you're not wrong. You just have to be conscientious about where you're purchasing and what the parent material is looking like, or the soil, the ground's looking like.
Sounds like a precursor to oil. 1,000 years,
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. Cool. Well, any more questions from you guys, or shall we simmer on over to some of Carol's questions, even though she's not here and she can watch later?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
That sounds good.
So Carol was a student in a previous class, and funny enough, this class helped her to submit enough information because of the template to be able to apply for a zoning variation. And from there, she's then been able to come back to the class. She's had the time to be able to do that. And now we've been able to kind of jump into a bigger conversation about design. Now, one of the things that a lot of students will have found in this class already is that finding topographic information could be problematic. There's not a lot of good options, but every once in a while you find a good GIS specialist who has access to good information. And so basically Carol had reached out to a local who had produced a contour map for her and had developed a contour map within her portfolio. And I asked if it was possible to get that into a KMZ file, KML file, so that way we could work on Google Earth Pro. Reason that I like working on Google Earth Pro is that it's very user-friendly. It's very easy to use. But the other thing is that it's geo-referenced. So you have the opportunity to actually go into a site, understand it from the perspective that you're looking on, and you can add different layers and different elements. One thing it's not great for is if you do create a small design or a small conversation, you can't move it. I can't move any of these lines. I can redraw them, but I can't actively move them. So there's pros and cons to it, but I do really enjoy it. So one of the things I asked for was a new contour map that was done on that level. So let's answer her questions in process. So she still got the answers. Second thread, as I said, I'm behind in assignment. So this question is more relevant to the third office hour lesson, but in case you feel this contributes to the entire class, I'd love to unpack these topo maps. Exactly why you wanted me to get those different topo maps made and how best to use them in my design process. So the reason why I wanted them was because when you're working on Google Earth Pro is that you want to be able to have the contours at different articulation points. So on, I don't know how big this is. Let me just pop up the boundary. The boundary should be able to give us the size. Oh, no, it doesn't. Okay. So what we'll do is we'll just quickly throw in a polygon. Nope, wrong one. There we go. And just kind of get a sense of this. And there's also this little spot over here, which won't be totally accurate because we're going over the road, but it will be accurate enough. So measurements, area, acres. So she's 102 acres, or for our metric friends, 41 hectares. Okay. We're just going to turn that off for now. So at 102 acres, what you will want is probably 10-foot contours, which is what we put here. She's in the States. In Canada, I'd probably do 5 to 4 meter, just because of the math. Now, I know it's not a perfect conversion, but the math makes it easy. And then from there, I know she's doing a home site. So I also asked for 2-foot contours and also 1-foot contours. Now, 1-foot contours, when you're looking at 102 acres, is too much. It's too much to look at. It's too much to to deduce what's going on. But once you get to 10 feet, it really gives you a sense of these different shapes and these different areas and generally what we're looking at. And if this was done correctly, yeah, you've got both the elevation of it as well. So these are 10-foot contours going from 1580, 1570, moving down that way. So one of the things that Carol talked about was this is not a question of if this is going to be a design for a site. This will be a design for a site. They are actively building. They want to get this information as quickly as possible. So while I love Google Slides and I think it's super accessible to anybody on the planet, if you're actively going to be on a site and if this is a feet first property, it's taking you out. They'll take you out of this property feet first because you're going to be on the other side of life. Then having something you can come back to continually that is geo-referenced is really important. And the reason I say this, I'm just going to pull up, I think I left this up here. There we go. Is you can use applications like GPS Kit for iOS, or you can use Gaia GPS, or you can use GPS waypoints on Android. And you can go and take photos of your site in situ, and it'll populate here on Google Earth Pro. And you can actually click through those different photos. So if you're doing site visits or if you're trying to see the change in vegetation over time, it's a great tool to hold all the information together. And it's also layered, which is good. Why I wanted her to bring these maps in is because I think there's value in her having this conversation here. And she has a very unique, different type of vegetation. All of these different areas are differently vegetated. So her then coming in and starting to create polygons for each of these little areas, because she's very fastidious with all of this, which is amazing, is important as I'm doing this rushed. This is not the level of detail and care, although that's not bad, would be useful to have for this area. And again, this is not what we're teaching in course, but this is how I design. So of course, I'm going to tell you exactly what I'm doing and how I'm doing it. So here we would put in whatever that forest type was, called forest one, and put in the different types. Let's say aspen, maple, Doug fir, which I don't know if it's true or not. With Google Earth Pro, you always want to put the name also in the description, because once you do that, when you click on it, it'll pop up. If it's not in the description, it won't. Second thing is she has a lot of pathways on this site, and being able to get down and really see the pathways and then chart them and put them into their own category, I think would be really useful for her. So again, while the course specifically talks about Google Slides, and generally because we're working with people who have backyards all the way up to folks who have sections or have full stations like out in Australia, it's generally the better tool for the conversation. However, this is what I use. She's really looking for a design conversation. So this was my major suggestion to her. I'm just going to go back to her questions here and go through them. How to integrate into the template. So one of the things that I would do is I'd probably do most of my design work here in Google Earth Pro. And the nice thing is that when you print off of Google Earth Pro, you can get kind of a rough, you can get a rough template. So you can get this sort of legend conversation going on. And so what I would do is I would edit this so that way you have all that information, and I would probably do a hybrid design where I take a bit of this color and put it into the template, or just use this as is. You could do either. Doesn't really change much about it. Next question. Any other useful information you could use those to impart valuable things to all of us budding PC? That's a very wide and broad question. Yeah, there's lots of tips and tricks, but without guidance, I just talk for hours on end. So bit much there. I think, gents, what I'm going to do is I'm going to continue on through her questions. If you guys want to stay on, fantastic. If not, it's a pleasure to see you both. Do keep in mind that we are coming up to a break here pretty quick. And I highly recommend, if you're behind working through the break, even working ahead. If you need to submit when you do, that's fine. I'll get to it when I'm back from that break. But yeah, any other questions from you guys before you pop out?
Oh, Carol's on. Thanks, Alan. And I did actually take 3 days off work for the rest of the week to catch up. So hopefully it'll be ahead by the next time we have office hours. And then
Awesome.
we'll see there. And then I do need to drop off. It's work day.
Yeah, you have things to do. No worries.
Same. Yeah, thanks, guys.
Thank
All
you.
right.
But it was really good to hear the Carol did use part of the design to then apply for changes in zoning, because that'll be That's the thing that I would be interested in if I ever end up purchasing vacant land for next
Mhm.
project.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much for everything today.
Most welcome.
Yes.
Carol, nice to see you.
Man, what a disappointment.
Nice to get you on. I've gone through a couple of your questions. I'm going to go through the rest of them quickly. I do have to get going, but
I kind of gave up and then I just now saw the link. Damn it.
yeah, no worries. So basically where we're at with your question here was, I know the best practice would be to complete the entire design before choosing a home site. However, we don't have that luxury. We're starting the process of building this summer by putting in a barn next to our proposed house site. The base of operations to the build. Place to bring power to now is next spring when we start building. Love to have you look over the site where we currently have chosen before we spend 22K and bringing in power in a week or two. Yeah, the thing, as I told the gents who were just on, generally I don't make any recommendations or suggestions until I've done an entire design site. What I'll do is I'll go through the water flow and generally where the water is flowing and where it's accumulating, making sure that the house is on the high side. So making sure it's not in a water flow. Second is if you're going to do anything interesting like bermed housing, or if you're going to try and use that thermal mass that is the earth to help cool, which generally I recommend these days because we're getting into a time in an area where we kind of need our houses to support us from a life support conversation as much as possible. Just be conscientious of what the water flow is in that area in terms of if there's too much water flow beneath ground and sublaminar flows. And then the third thing is just be very conscientious of fire. So if you're in a valley that's highly forested, or if in an area that's highly forested, being conscientious about how much of that has risk, and if you're in the direct sight line of that, because of course fire moves quicker uphill. You want to be conscientious about having at least 2 exit or ingress and egress points. You want to be conscientious about how you're moving about the site. So I can't comment specifically on anyone's site. I could kind of tell you about pros and cons, but yeah, I think you showed it to me in the template conversation there, right?
I don't know. I'm kind of checked out.
Yeah, no worries. Well, maybe what we can do is we can set up another time to chat, or we'll see you at office hours and we can go through it again. I do got to run.
What happened? Why? What happened?
I'm not sure. The other guys got on with the link and the password just fine, so I'm not sure what happened.
I kept trying. Oh, what a bummer.
Yeah, sorry about that.
Well, it's not your fault, I guess. I'm sorry. I'm a little bit, anyway. Yeah, I just found out my mom fell,
Oh, I'm sorry to hear.
so I'm a little bit not
No.
present. Anyway, I'll watch the video. Did we have links to the other 2 that the 3rd and the 4th?
Yeah, so I answered that in the video as well. Nobody showed up for session 3 and session 4, so there was no office hour.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I feel like I'm blowing the opportunity of this class, but
No, not at all. Not at all. You're doing as much as you can as life comes at you. So that's all any of us can hope for, is doing the best we can. So don't come down on yourself. You're doing a great job. We'll have another little Zoom chat if we need to. But feel free to drop me an email and we can go over it.
okay, thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Take care.